It's time to get your morning started with the news you need to know.
News update.
This is what's trending with DJ and PK. Hashtag Utah Jazz.
Stats don't mean I don't care about your individual stats. I don't care how many points you score. I don't care what you post on Instagram. It doesn't matter. It's a team sport. You play to win. We have to nip this in the bud now because I've said this before and I'll say it again. There will not be free minutes in this program. And so you're either going to start learning and you're going to start playing the right way and you're going to start participating with your teammates or you're not going to play.
Will Hardy getting fired up after the Jazz lose to the Minnesota Timberwolves. It's not so much the losing because, well, they've lost a lot. But if you lose the wrong way, you can light a fire under Will Hardy in the postgame.
Well, that's got to be directed at George. Who else could it possibly be directed at?
I think
nip it in the bud. You're not going to do it with Chris Dunn. He's pushing 30 years old. You're going to do it with John Collins.
They're too old. No, you're right. I think it's directed at several people, but I think it's primarily Keontae George.
I think it can only be George. Sensible? After 2 weeks of playing?
Didn't he say something about there's like 30 passes that could have been made, or 30 open guys that got passed up? I can't remember how he phrased it.
It was a two-part statement.
Yeah.
That was the
And so I think there were multiple guys who did it.
Toxic.
But then there was the follow-up question later in the interview about Keontae, and it was for not executing, or he phrased it some way, but basically I think they came out of a timeout with a play, and Keontae ran the play for himself.
Right, that's
and
what
there's
it
other
was.
stuff. So that specific play is at the root of it. But he was irritated because there was a lot of not passing the ball to the open man.
I think it was directed at one guy.
There were. You're right
got
about
to
the
trade
nip it.
him, man. He's a cancer.
You're right about nip it in the bud. You don't use the phrase.
Get rid of him now.
You don't use the phrase "nip it in the bud" for some dude who's 30 who may not be on the roster next year.
Right.
But nonetheless, that guy doing it, that veteran doing it, can encourage the younger guy or guys to think it's okay. But the guy who's a point guard and has to be making good decisions and good choices and blah, blah, blah is Keontae George.
Wonder what they can get for him.
I mean, I think he's thought it about THT at other times, and he just benched THT. He didn't have a blow-up. He just didn't play him anymore.
Right.
And statistics don't mean bleep. I mean, that's the bigger theory. You know, THT had 37 41-point games at the end of last year, but if you're not running the stuff the way coach wants it run, he doesn't play you. So, get in line, Keontae. And everybody else, quit being a bad example and making bad impressions on Keontae. And it's the Jazz and the Wolves again tonight. It's deja vu all over again.
Well, great. I hope we don't have to have all hugs and kisses again. I am getting so sick
of that. That should be reserved for the end of playoff series. Old guy shakes fist
Get
at
your
clouds.
butt kicked, go hug and kiss.
Hey, man,
Isn't
good
that
to see
peachy?
you. Good to see you. Good to see you. See you again Monday. Hey, want to go to brunch tomorrow?
Oh, yeah, they had all day yesterday.
Can we go to your house, Rudy, and hang out?
I mean, yeah, he's got a house here.
Did he ever sell that thing?
No.
It was on the market for a long time.
He posted a video of him working out at his house.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he's kept it. He likes it here.
He ought to have
summer.
both clubs over.
This is not exactly new news that players who get traded from here come back. It has a lot of things going for it. I'm just getting tired of all the lovey-dovey preceded by another L.
Tip-off tonight, 7 o'clock. Pregame with Jake Scott and Tim Lacombe at 6 right here on The Zone.
Hashtag NBA.
Taking it left side, looking for Vassell, finds him in the lane, lobs to the rim, slam, dunk, Victor Wembanyama.
Dylan brings it across to DeAndre, now left corner, DeJounte for another three, it's good again. DeJounte Murray just hit another three-pointer, and the Hawks lead by 25.
Jumping up and down, waving his arms, Cleveland looking, trying to get it to Luka, instead Kyrie, turning, do he have time, he got it away in time, he hits, and the Mavericks have won, and a dog pile in half court, as Kyrie Irving gives the Mavericks a monstrous win against the Denver Nuggets, winning at 107-105.
Kyrie Irving with an outrageous left-handed half hook, half throw, a little bit of shot put mixed in there, something. Just get the ball towards the rim, and I hope it goes in.
PK knows what it is.
And it did.
What?
You made that type of shot. Come on.
Yeah.
His was more pure. It was with his right hand. He's right-handed. You know, this was with Kyrie's offhand.
These are pros. What offhand? You shouldn't have an offhand at that level.
You still have an offhand.
You shouldn't.
And you from 17 feet, you have an offhand.
Sure, but you shouldn't. You have it
not around the rim, not inside of 5 feet.
Offhand, it's the other hand.
Okay, it's the other hand. It was the offhand, and you've
this
developed
is your job
because you closed the ambidextrous. But that was outrageous, PK.
It's not like Kingsley Suamatatea, who can sign his name with the same amount of purity and penmanship with both hands. How about that, Yak? See, I pick up on the stuff.
Look at you go.
You didn't even know that.
I did not. And
right?
Furthermore, I don't care.
And I do. Well, that just shows ambidexterity.
Ambidexterity is a good thing to have, especially when the game is on the line and you can't get to the free throw line.
Right. And for Kingsley, as he goes to the NFL, suppose they present a contract, but his right hand's all banged up. No problem. Boom, sign. He still gets paid.
Key development right there. Mavericks beat the Denver Nuggets, who haven't been losing much since the All-Star break. But if that's what it takes to beat Denver, how do you do that 4 times? So good luck with that. But they got him. And Denver is now 11-2 since the All-Star break. The Milwaukee Bucks beat the Phoenix Suns. No Giannis Antetokounmpo. He sat that one out, and Lillard went for 31, and Bobby Portis, 31 points, 5 of 5 from the three-point line. Now we have to check the next game and see if the law of numbers brings Bobby Portis back to earth.
Well, I think the law of numbers, though, more importantly, Portis had a good game, good for him. But the statistics are showing that when Antetokounmpo's out, Lillard goes off. His stat line, his slash line, is very impressive when Yanni is not there.
31 points, 16 assists. Impressive for Lillard in the win over the Phoenix Suns, who did have all 3 of their guys. Are you still tracking their record with all 3 of the guys? It was a
I am not.
Rare loss for them.
But they didn't have Isaiah Thomas, so they'll get him back. He's up from the G League. He's gone from the Stars. I miss him. I'm sure when he comes back for Phoenix and Phoenix kicks the crap out of the Jazz, they'll
he'll be hugging everybody.
Yeah,
hug everybody. Hawks beat the Clippers 110-93. The Clippers going to give us something in the playoffs, or just a big tease and then they get knocked out? What's their deal? They're going to be healthy, I guess that's the first question.
I don't know.
Oh, come on.
Jeez, that was emphatic.
It was. They had Kawhi Leonard, they had Paul George, they had Harden, and they got worked at home by Atlanta, 110-93. All right, DJ and PK.
Hashtag college basketball.
They find Wolf with 5 seconds remaining. He stops, finds Imbang, crosses over into Noling. Noling up and in, and the Bulldogs win! The Bulldogs win! Yale goes to the March Madness! Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness!
Oh my God!
Matt Noling! What a shot!
Players, they're mobbing Noling! They will go to the monitor to review, but it looks like the Yale Bulldogs are going to March Madness.
Wow, Matt Noling, the senior forward.
You can't draw up more of a storybook ending for this Yale season.
Oh my goodness.
Well, it's not the ending if they're going to play in the NCAA tournament, but was that the student broadcast? What'd you get there, Yak?
It was the junior high.
It had to have been the student broadcast. It was on our FTP earlier.
Yale at the buzzer to win the Ivy League title over Brown. They're into the NCAA tournament. BYU gets a 6 seed, not the 5 they were projected for. Utah State gets an 8 seed. Cougars and Duquesne Thursday in Omaha, 10:40 a.m. The Aggies and the TCU Horned Frogs Friday night in Indianapolis. Prime time, 8 o'clock.
Where else can you get a game in which each team has a player named Fusini?
Nowhere else. This is it.
So you didn't know that until
One
I
of
brought
a
that
kind.
Up.
You brought that up yesterday.
Yeah. Fusini over here, Fusini over there. Now, our Fusini is about 40 pounds heavier than their Fusini.
Here a Fus, there a Fus, everywhere Fus.
They're both very good rebounders, though.
Yeah,
did you see
the Atlantic 10 level.
Did you mention the other connection this game has?
Did you hear me? Did I mention it?
I heard you say the Fusenis. Did you mention Dusan?
Well, you should be listening to every word I say. That's your job.
You know he listens to other shows in there.
Yeesh. No, what do you got?
Dusan Mahorcic, who spent a year at Utah, was the guy when he was at Utah that said he was recruited by BYU but wasn't willing to live the honor code. He's their starting big man for the Duquesne Dukes on his 4th program.
I got no problem with that. Better just not go there if you don't want to live the code than
go there and break the code and get busted and then not be playing basketball.
Right.
So that's another connection in this game.
The Utes are a 2-seed in the NIT. They're playing UC Irvine tomorrow night. The Utah women's team got sent to Spokane. They're a 5-seed, playing 12-seeded South Dakota State and presumably getting the host Gonzaga Bulldogs in the second round if they win.
Who did not win their tournament. Portland won it, didn't it?
Portland did, yes. Got like a 14 seed or something like that. The BYU women's program is part of the first ever WBIT, and they're going to play 4th-seeded Santa Clara on Thursday.
WBIT.
The women's version of the NIT?
No, I thought the WNIT's been around.
There has been one around.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's still around.
Yeah, I think they've rebranded it here. It's called the Women's Basketball Invitational Tournament, and BYU's part of it this year.
Way to go.
Plenty of hoops. We've got questions up. Question of the day. We will get to that coming up with BYU and Utah State and your expectations for them in the NCAA tournament. DJ and PK.
Hashtag NFL.
The reason why I wanted to come here because I wanted to be able to win championships with Coach Tomlin and these guys in the locker room. And, we got some amazing players, guys like, Cam Hayward, guys like Minka, George Pickens, and just so many other great players along the way. Got to see some guys like Freiermuth and Samalu in there. And, just it's a great place to be. Grateful for the opportunity to be able to get after it, do what we came here to do, and that's to win football games.
Russell Wilson, now a Pittsburgh Steeler. They were a playoff team last year without him, just barely, and they weren't in very long, but they finished 9-8. He should be an upgraded quarterback. Kenny Pickett got traded to the Eagles, so
why?
Now Justin Fields comes in from the Bears.
Have you looked at
Wilson and
you looked at Pickett's stats?
Yeah.
They're great.
Yeah.
Why would it be an upgrade?
Because they didn't even trust Pickett to start all year.
He was like 5-1 when he started.
Mm-hmm. Surrounded by a great defense. Did he make the plays that won the game?
Either it's going to be the quarterback is either going to get his record or it's not. You can't just move the goalposts here each time you don't like a player. We go by his record, but somehow Pickett's record doesn't count. But Wilson's record, gosh, he was getting chewed out by his head coach on his sidelines.
Yep.
But we didn't even bring that up. He was getting benched for people who weren't even half as good as Mason, the big-time player out of Oklahoma State, Rudolph.
We did bring that up.
Might have brought it up when I overslept last week. You sure didn't bring it up.
Trubisky had a lot of games where he couldn't throw for 200 yards. So if you're looking for stats, their lack of a passing game. Did they win some games? Defensive scores, field position, low-scoring games? Yes.
Fine. Then don't ever bring up the quarterback's record then. That's all I'm asking. Be consistent.
Former Utah star Tyler Huntley is set to join the Cleveland Browns. He gets a one-year veteran's minimum salary. They've got Deshaun Watson, Jameis Winston, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So Huntley versus Dorian Thompson-Robinson for the last spot on the roster, or you think something unexpected happens with Watson or Winston?
Wow, you just put him down on third string? And he was second string with Baltimore all these years, and you just anointed him third string?
I just gave you two options.
No, you didn't have him competing with the other two.
Yeah, you said
something happens
DTR.
to them.
So is it Huntley versus Robinson for the last spot, or does something happen at one of the other two? You got four guys for three spots. I just listed all four.
Why can't he start?
Why can't he beat out Jameis Winston?
Because he's 3-7 as a starter.
No, he's not.
Counting the playoff game with Cincinnati, yeah. He's 3-7 and 10 starts in Baltimore.
But doesn't matter.
Okay.
Records matter or they don't. We got to figure this out with quarterbacks right now.
It depends on whether the team thinks they matter. That's what matters.
Depends on whether you think it matters.
I think it mattered in Baltimore. I think it mattered to Baltimore, or Baltimore would have signed him again.
Well, we're not talking about Baltimore. We're talking about here.
I just talked about Baltimore.
I'm not talking about Baltimore.
Okay.
You asked me about Cleveland. You didn't ask me about Baltimore.
They
I can only answer the questions you asked me.
Winston, who has a lot more experience. I think he's expected to be the backup to Watson. I don't think they can jettison Watson and all that guaranteed money, but I wouldn't rule it out because I don't think Wilson got jettisoned in Denver just because of production.
Jettisoned?
Jettisoned.
Wow.
Cut loose. Released. Waived. Cut. I think a lot of it was the money. Maybe that'll end up being the case with Watson, too, because you get a lot of guaranteed money. It's probably too early and too much money, but wouldn't rule it out. Colorado coach Deion Sanders says he has concerns about Caleb Williams playing in cold weather if he's taken number 1 overall by the Chicago Bears. A kid that's coming from California for the last couple of years and went to Oklahoma, that's not terribly cold. Chicago's cold, man. You got to think about that stuff when you're taking a young man. Like, see, when you take a guy from Ohio State and you bring him to Chicago, okay, I can understand that. But California to Chicago? Come on, you got to factor that stuff in. That matters.
You're 4-8. Who cares what you think about Caleb Williams?
He's Coach Prime. He did went on to say he doesn't want his son, Shadur, to play in a cold weather city when he enters the NFL draft.
That's all he cares about. I think he cares about that more than winning games at Colorado.
I don't want my kid going nowhere cold next year. He grew up in Texas. He played in Jackson and Colorado. Season's over before it gets cold in Colorado. I'm just thinking way ahead. I don't want that for him.
Season was over in October.
DJ and PK.
Hashtag Major League Baseball.
Joey Votto homered first pitch he saw. 17 seasons playing for the Reds. Now he's in Toronto. Ageless wonder or one of these guys that we're going to forget where he played the last year or two of his career?
I thought he was the second pitch. I thought it was the first swing.
I read it was the first pitch.
Okay, maybe it was. Well, he's 40 years old, and he really sucked last year. But he's from Toronto, the area anyway, I believe. And I know he's from Canada. So it's worth a shot. I mean, he's not a big-time player anymore.
DJ and PK.
Hashtag RSL.
Royals open the season getting shut out. Chicago scores twice in the second half and gets the win. Royals are back in action Friday night against the North Carolina Courage. Need to be a little better in front of goal. Created probably 3 good chances in the second half, but they were all saved.
Are we going to do women's soccer this year?
I don't know. Do you want to?
No.
That was a rhetorical question, PK. We already figured that out.
Do you?
It depends on if people go to games.
Do you? Oh, yeah.
It does.
I couldn't care. It sold out every freaking game.
Okay.
It comes right back. 20,000 people were there on Saturday, so we're good.
DJ and PK.
Golf.
Scotty Scheffler becomes the first golfer to go back-to-back at the Players'
Gives a crap.
Championship.
They didn't have 20,000 at the tournament.
They had way more than 20,000 at the tournament. Beat Wyndham Clark by one stroke.
If it's popular, I support it.
No, if it's popular, I'll talk about it. That's 2 different things.
No. Beep, beep, beep.
You're backtracking left and right this morning.
It's not even a backtrack. I'll let you know when I backtrack.
All things to all people, as long as they're popular.
Except for country music. Wyndham Clark, 1 stroke back. Heartbreak at 18. A little too much pace on that putt. Started in the left side of the hole, spun around, did a U-turn, stayed out, and came right back at him. Halfway in and didn't stay in. No playoff for him.
I like what Scheffler said about, he's becoming very popular and very good and probably the most dominant player, and she's going to get a big head. And he said, I'm married to a great woman. If I come home flaunting my trophy, she'll, I think is it a literal quote? If not, it's close to it. She'll just smack me upside of the head. I'll get humbled in a second. So that's a good attitude to have. Don't think you're anything special. Keep grinding. Keep doing what you're doing. And can you become the dominant player of your era? I wouldn't rule it out.
Can he stay healthy? He was talking earlier in the tournament about how much pain he was having and turning a takeaway, and you could see the what do they call that tape that they use? You could see that
KT tape.
Yeah, the KT tape was peeking above his shirt there, and he's talking about altering his swing and throwing his hands at it, and all stuff I guess pros can do that and just change his swing on the fly to minimize the pain or eliminate it? And will he remain the face of the tour, or will he be the next guy Liv picks off if they don't cut a deal? Which maybe they will at some point, but that just seems to drag on interminably. That is what is trending. There are your headlines. Coming up, Patrick Stevens, Washington Post college sports contributor and bracketologist. He will join us next. Did BYU and Utah State get a raw deal? If so, how bad? And if so, does he think they can win the game anyway? So who'll remember the seed as long as they win the game? We'll get to him coming up next. And Steve Cleveland, former BYU and Fresno State basketball coach, is here at 9 o'clock. DJ and PK, it's 97.5 The Zone.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I present...
This is JJ and Alex.
Joining us right now, Eamon Brennan here with us. Buzzer by Eamon Brennan is where you can find his byline.
Yeah, I mean, I think BYU is a great demonstration of the power of teams that play really, really well early in the year tend to be really, really good. Started off with a win over San Diego State, which is obviously a very good team. Every other team they beat, small, large, medium, they absolutely destroyed. They very quickly went from 36th in Ken Palm's preseason rankings to top 10. And there were a lot of people thinking that was a mirage, that they were just beating up on bad teams. Basically, been about as good as they were early in the year. I mean, they've taken more losses. They play in the best conference in college basketball. All season, they've been very steady, very solid, and have lived up to what I thought in the preseason was signs of a really promising team.
Catch JJ and Alex afternoons from 3 to 6. Presented by G2G Bars on 97.5 The KSL Sports Zone.
Catch Breaking Benjamin and Stain on their 2024 tour as they make a stop at Utah First Credit Union Amphitheater on October 5th. Get your tickets at livenation.com starting today, or listen to The Zone all day on Thursday, March 21st for your chance to win. Well, PK, the NCAA tournament hasn't started yet, but already the transfer portal is filling up. You got to love college basketball. At least it's not filling up the way it does in football season with players who have games still to go with their teams. I don't think anybody in the NCAA tournament's bailed out. Maybe that's why teams are bailing out of the NIT.
Well, because it is a transfer portal, yeah.
Ooey Pooey's lost about a third of their team already.
Fetch.
Yeah, I know, right? Time to welcome in Patrick Stevens, Washington Post college sports contributor and bracketologist. Patrick, good morning.
Good morning, fellas. How are you doing today?
Good. We are curious, since you follow this stuff on a regular basis, before we get to any of the specifics, big picture going over social media, there were people claiming this is the worst job the selection committee has ever done. Is that true? Were their hands tied because there were so many bid thieves right there at the end? Did they mess stuff up? What happened? What do you think?
Well, I think they actually got the selections about the way that I thought they would, based on the historical trends that the committee decides on. Based on, like you said, there were certainly, fewer spots to go around once NC State got in, once Oregon got in, all that. But I thought there were certainly some questionable seeding decisions. You kind of look at the numbers and you look at Gonzaga as a team that probably is a little overseeded, and San Diego State's probably a little overseeded, and Florida Atlantic probably a little overseeded, and everybody outside of San Diego State in the Mountain West severely underseeded. And so it's sort of a weird combination of things. It was almost like they pretty much hit on all of the power conference teams that they were supposed to do, and then just kind of messed up sizing up those teams outside those top six leagues. It was a weird bit of work. It was almost as if it felt like as the show was unfolding that you were looking at teams like, oh, well, we've heard of these guys. They've made a run before, so maybe they should get credit for that in the seeding process. But besides that, I think that's probably the biggest issue that I have with how this committee put together its work.
Yeah, 25, 30 years ago, I was a beat writer covering the University of Utah here in town for the Salt Lake Tribune. And I used to say that all the time, that when that committee goes in that room, you can't take away human emotions and human biases, and everyone has a bias. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're a prejudiced or racist or anything like that. It's just that you have your own individual biases, and one of them is if you don't have a good rep in the conference or in the NCAA tournament, you may not get rewarded as such. And I think that Gonzaga has a great rep, and you just mentioned two other teams who had phenomenal runs last year, so they got that. I wanted to ask you about, I read that in the last 13 years, 10 times a number one seed didn't get out of the first round. That seems hard to believe, but that's what they were saying. I didn't double check it. I'll take their word from it.
First weekend, maybe?
Yeah,
you said first round. There's only been one.
Did I say first round?
Yeah,
no, I meant weekend.
Yeah.
Weekend. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. I meant they didn't get to the Sweet 16 then. So an 8 or 9 upset them in the second game, basically. Of the number one seeds, who do you see as potentially being vulnerable?
Well, the short answer is not Connecticut, but I think there's always the variable of do you run into Tom Izzo at the second day at a site because that's what North Carolina could be doing. So that's maybe one that could be a little vulnerable, but that's also Carolina's playing in Charlotte, and it has a pretty good history against Izzo in the postseason. So there's that thing to consider. And, of course, until proven otherwise, don't you have to be at least a little questionable about Purdue, right?
Yeah.
The good thing for them, at least after they've lost to North Texas and to St. Peter's and to Fairleigh Dickinson, is at least they won't run into a double-digit seed in the second round because it'll be an 8 or a 9 if they would play. Assuming they get out of the first round, they'll have to play another play-in winner this year, whether it's Montana State with that sort of massively reconstructed roster that finally won 3 games in a row for the first time in the Big Sky tournament, and then Grambling making a first-time appearance. But if I had to put it on anybody, I'd say maybe it would be a Utah State creating problems for Purdue in a 1-8 first-round game or second-round game. Sorry.
There has been a history of teams that go to Dayton making pretty good runs in the tournament, even though because you're in Dayton, it looks like you barely made the tournament. Do you buy any of these teams going Sweet 16, Elite 8 after having played in Dayton on Tuesday or Wednesday?
Well, I think that whoever comes out of that Virginia-Colorado State game will have a decent chance against Texas. I mean, if Colorado State plays the way they play in their best games, and usually that involves Isaiah Stevens being really good and getting a bunch of different guys involved, I mean, they're going to have a chance to knock off at least Texas. And then, you would run in at that point to Tennessee, which does not exactly have the greatest long-term history in March. Rick Barnes does not have the greatest long-term history in March. And then you look at a Boise State or a Colorado, who I think are both pretty good. They'd be facing a Florida team that's dealing with a significant injury variable. Probably a Florida team, I would say otherwise, is underseeded. And then the possibility of playing Marquette, which itself got bounced in the second round last year. So I think both of those teams have at least a shot at making it through to the second weekend, both Boise State and Colorado, and also Colorado State. I don't know if Virginia can score enough on a consistent basis to be able to win not just the play-in game, but also to win 2 more games on the weekend. But the 2 Mountain West teams in Colorado, I think each of them has at least a fighting chance at being able to make it into the second weekend.
Papa Patino was quoted as saying that basically don't pay attention to the net ranking, don't pay attention to Ken Palm, and because it doesn't really matter, and so he's going to be done with it. And obviously St. John's didn't get in and has declined the NIT. What do you say to that as far as all season long we read these net rankings, we read these Ken Palm. Ken Palm lives here in Salt Lake. We have him on the show multiple times. Is Patino right in that?
Well, let's start off with something that people don't seem to be looking at very closely when it comes to St. John's. St. John's has exactly the same number of Hall of Fame coaches on its sidelines as it does victories over teams in the NCAA tournament field. 1. They beat Creighton a couple weeks back. That's their only victory over a team that's in the NCAA tournament field. So, my advice to St. John's would be to go win more games against teams that are in the tournament field. Secondly, the net is the ranking itself is not necessarily the important part of this. It's sort of using it as a sorting tool. And so you size up how that's used. You size up, the metrics are not necessarily supposed to be an end-all, be-all. They're supposed to be a bit of a guide. And frankly, the history of the committee leans more towards what they have on the team sheet that's called result-based metrics rather than predictive metrics. And so, you look at the predictive metrics, which is KenPom, which is the ESPN metric, and, they're top 25 in both of them, St. John's is. But in the result-based metrics, strength of record, 45th, KPI, 71st, a little more questionable there. So I think that somebody that's been around for as long as Rick Pitino has a pretty decent idea as to how all of this works. And so, I think that he's understandably stumping for his program, but the reality is that St. John's needed to do a little bit better than, say, just win a couple games against Villanova or, beat Butler a couple times, and, get 1 out of 3 against Seton Hall. I mean, they did not have a whole lot to work with in terms of high-end victories, and that's the reason why the Red Storm is done for the year.
I read some people saying that Duquesne got VCU's slot, that the whole bracket was set for VCU, and that Duquesne, with the resume they have, should have never been an 11 seed. They should have been lower, but it was so late there wasn't time to change the bracket with all the permutations, and they just stuck Duquesne in there, which would suggest that BYU got a break then as a 6 seed playing 11 seeded Duquesne. Do you think that's true?
Well, I mean, the way I kind of size it up, like, I would have thought you would have put James Madison on the 11 line ahead of either VCU or Duquesne. So it's just as possible that the committee messed up that seeding assessment as well. But that said, I would agree to an extent that there's a little bit of a break there for BYU. That said, Duquesne is a ferocious defensive team. They have a couple guys on that team in particular. Jimmy Clark is just a super disruptive backcourt option. Day Grant, a veteran, tough guard. I mean, this is a team that very much reflects Keith Gambrot, their veteran coach, who has managed to take them now to their first NCAA tournament since 1977. The one thing I will say for BYU's sake is that we're not talking about, we're not talking about a great offensive team in Duquesne overall. And so there is a chance that this is a game that BYU is simply going to be able to outscore an opponent in the first round. Like, it would not surprise me at all if we see that game end up going into 88-73 territory or something like that, and BYU's offense just simply carries the day.
Do you care about where teams go? I mean, the literal destination, does that matter to you?
I think the top handful of teams should be slotted somewhere close to home. And so Connecticut, for example, getting Brooklyn and then on to Boston as its path to the Final Four. And I believe, it's Indianapolis and then Detroit for Purdue. Like, I think that's fair. But I think when you start getting further down into the bracket, like, I think it's more important to create as much bracket integrity and consistency as possible, as opposed to saying, we're going to send the worst number 2 seed to face the third best number 1 seed because they're closer to home. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I understand trying to avoid conference matchups. I think that's really important to do that for as long as possible. But the whole geographic thing just feels like something where the NCAA is trying to save a few bucks on the one thing that actually makes it a ton of money each year. I think that for the sake of having integrity of the event, competitive integrity, that's something that should be you should focus more on that than simply saying, well, we can keep this team 100 miles closer to home if we send them to this site rather than this other site.
A lot of BYU fans, and their numbers to back it up, thought the Cougars were going to be a 5 seed, but there's 3 5 seeds playing on Friday, Sunday, and BYU doesn't play on Sunday. So that only leaves 1 spot, and that would have put BYU against Kansas, which means Kansas at a 4 seed is basically playing a road game, and it's a conference matchup, which, as you point out, the committee tries to stay away from. How'd they decide to put 3 of the 5 seeds on Friday? Because Otherwise, BYU's not in the 6-11. They're probably on the 5 line where most Cougar fans expected / hope to be.
Yeah, and it's funny as I go through the bracket process every year, and certainly every year that BYU's relevant, that's something that is always in the back of your mind, right? Like you've got to keep that variable in mind. And in fact, when I was kind of evaluating all the teams, I'm like, I was looking at the exact same scenario. It's like there's no way that they're going to put BYU on the 5 line with all the reasons you just delineated. A big part of why you have 3 Friday, Sunday sites on that 4 line is because 2 of them are the leftover teams that were shipped out to Spokane. And so Spokane's a Friday, Sunday site. You're just kind of stuck with it. Those are basically the last 2, I think, 4 seeds that wind up out there. So at that point, you're basically in coin flip mode. I'm trying to remember what the other one was. It Brooklyn, Duke, and whatnot. And even then, let's just kind of look at that. That's a South bracket. You don't want to put BYU in that spot because that's a Friday, Sunday, second weekend site. So not only do you have to match up the first weekend, but you also have to make sure that they were going to be in only the East or the West this season because those are the Thursday, Saturday sites in the second weekend.
Having said all that, do you think BYU and Utah State are going to win their first games?
Yes, on both counts. I think BYU catches a Duquesne team that has to travel a little bit, and a team that I think, as we talked about a little bit earlier, that the Cougars are certainly capable of outscoring. And I tell you what, I watch enough Big Ten basketball to know that I don't really trust any of those teams other than maybe Purdue. So I actually think there's a decent pathway for BYU to make a Sweet 16 run this season. And as for Utah State, facing a TCU team that has just kind of bobbed along, played a terrible non-conference schedule, put up a good record, got that early in-conference play victory at Baylor, and has kind of lived off of that, just sort of handling its business at home. I think TCU's okay. I saw TCU almost lose at a Georgetown team that wound up only winning 2 conference games. So, trusting your own eyeballs a little bit. I don't know how good the Horned Frogs really are. And I stay up and, when I get back from whatever game I'm at on a given night, there's a lot of Mountain West basketball that I've watched. And I think that Danny Sprinkle's done such a fabulous job stitching this Utah State team together kind of on the fly. I like the Aggies to be able to advance in Indianapolis to face Purdue on the weekend.
We appreciate the time, Patrick. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy the tournament.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Patrick Stevens, Washington Post college sports contributor and bracketologist, join us right here on The Zone. DJ and PK, you got your picks. You got your thoughts on the seeding. We'll get to those coming up. Steve Cleveland's going to be here at 9 o'clock. Stay with us. DJ and PK, it's 97.5 The Zone.
Nominate the youth sports volunteer that you know for the Hercules Hero of the Week. Submit your nomination at kslsports.com/contest and listen every Thursday afternoon to JJ and Alex for the winner. Help us celebrate the efforts of those volunteers making an impact with the Hercules Hero of the Week, and it's sponsored by Hercules Credit Union. So there you go.
We just spoke with Patrick Stevens, Washington Post college sports contributor.
Yes, I love you.
And bracketologist.
Patrick Stevens. Yes.
Yeah, I got it. Good. And you love him because he backed up one thing you've always thought. Once people know the name and the logo, they can't help but look at previous years. Even if they try to wash it out of their mind and they don't have any of the numbers, they know San Diego State was in the title game a year ago. They know Gonzaga's been good for a quarter of a century. And they know the Mountain West, with the exception of that Aztec run, has a big stretch of Ophir stretching back.
Yeah.
So everybody else's seedings got depressed a little bit. San Diego State got inflated a little bit.
Right. I have no problem with that. Yeah, I've been saying that forever, as you just said. I found that. I got eyeball deep in the NCAA tournament in the 90s. When I was in California, I was like a utility guy. So one day I could be covering the biggest thing, and then the other thing I could be covering high school sports, nothing against them by any stretch. And so the point being.
But you could literally go from a Laker game to an NHL game to a high school game on 3 consecutive days.
No question. Yes. Yeah. NBA Finals, you name it. So the point I'm making is you had to be, and I'm breaking into the business and I want to be somebody, right? So you had to be adept at knowing everything, as much information as you can get. So I studied the NCAA tournament a lot in the 80s and
that's when they're going to need utility guys.
Right.
All of a sudden they have multiple teams in the LA area in the tournament.
Right, and I'm a younger guy trying to make his mark. Then I move up here, and that was my primary assignment, covering the Utes. So it became my life. This time of year, my gosh, I was just running on adrenaline so much back then. Selection Sunday was like Christmas times 1,000 for me back in the day, right? It was so exciting. It still is, but I'm not into it as much. But I have this history of studying it, and I see that the committees, that people change over time because they're appointed a duration, and then they go away and other people replace them, blah blah blah. And this is what they do, and I really have no problem with it. There's 2 things for BYU I do not want to hear complaining about their seeding, because they don't have a history. They've got 2 Sweet 16 appearances, and they had the National Player of the Year each time. Great, phenomenal college players in Ainge and Fredette, right? And they made it. And other times, that's it. So there's not that history there. Plus the Sunday thing, the committee is going to accommodate you to a degree, but they're not going to bend over backwards to give you a special privilege that nobody else gets. If you were Kentucky and all of a sudden Kentucky said, we're not playing on Sunday, that's another story. But you're not. Or now seems to be UConn. Everybody and their dog's picking UConn these days. So we'll put them in there for now. But that's the way it is. They have these biases, and you're just going to have to deal with it. And it's the same thing with the Mountain West. Yeah, I thought 6 teams were going to get in. 6 teams did get in. But they didn't, like New Mexico. What'd they get, slapped with an 11?
New Mexico's,
they are
yes, 11.
Yeah.
Yes. That's where.
So to me, that's a little low, but you haven't been in the tournament since 2014.
And they were listed as a bubble team.
That's almost 7 years ago.
That's where the automatic qualifier bid thieves pretty much ended up.
Right.
Everybody across the line.
But I thought
was 11.
They should have gotten in irregardless. If they lose to San Diego State on Saturday, I thought, my opinion, was that they were still in. Maybe not. Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they had to win.
I think they're
Little Patino was making his case on Thursday.
He was selling it all week. I think maybe they do make it in if there hadn't been so many upsets. NC State, Oregon, I don't know. The Oregon game was later. I think the NC State game had already happened. So you could see some of those large bids disappearing if you're on the bubble. Because I thought
they
Oklahoma.
Were about the same time Saturday night.
Okay, Oklahoma had, I thought, a chance to get in. But, man, once there's 4 or 5 of these teams breaking through, you're out. And Oklahoma's out.
If New Mexico had been in the tournament the last 3 or 4 years, I believe they would have been in. Yeah. I don't really have any problem with that. Never forget, it's a TV show. And TV people, they don't care about who wins or loses as long as the ratings are there. If they need the Bulls to get in, then they'll root their butts off for the Bulls. And speaking of, obviously, of MJ.
MJ.
I mean, he was the worldwide attraction. Yeah. Everybody wanted to see him. He was the Beatles. It wasn't LeBron. It was MJ. And so we understand that. But you look at BYU, if you complain about their seed, I'm not going to listen. Why should they bend over backwards to give you something that they don't do anybody else?
Well, and it's, as Patrick just pointed out, depending on how the bracket's set up, it's not half the tournament that's out of play. It can be 3/4 of the tournament.
Right.
There's two of the 4 sides can go away the first week. This year, 3 did. But even if it's a Thursday side this week, what about the next week? Not that BYU ends up in a regional final very often, but
if it's a headache they don't want to deal with.
Right. And this year, they had 3 Friday games, 3 Friday, Sunday,
yeah, so
5 seats. So that was the line BYU looked headed for. And Kansas blocked the other one. All right, DJ and PK, when we come back, a lot of people commenting on Will Hardy's post-game comments Saturday. If you didn't hear them, we'll get those for you. Your reaction coming up. They're pointed at Keontae George, maybe other players too, but Keontae George is the one they're invested in, and he is the future. So we'll get to that next. Stay with us.